Hello and welcome to today's Wired briefing, taking control of bill payments in the era of hybrid work. I'm Greg Williams, the Deputy Global Editorial Director of Wired. In today's briefing, we'll explore the current trends shaping the financial services industry and learn how we can bring billers and payers together through their banks to create safe, secure and accessible digital bill payment ecosystems. The pandemic has had a significant impact on the financial services industry. The need for more flexibility over outgoings is stronger than ever. We're seeing big societal shifts in how people work, a rise in the prospect of a cashless society, and an increase in people receiving an irregular income, such as gig workers and those working on 0 hours contracts. To discuss this, I'm excited to welcome Frode Åsheim, Mastercard's Executive Vice President for Bill Pay. Frode ensures a global approach and strategy to both bill pay and pay by account services at Mastercard. And he's also the CEO of Mastercard Payment Services, powering digital real-time payment infrastructure, bill payment and e-invoicing applications in the Nordics and beyond. Frode, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for having me. It's excellent. And I'm very enthusiastic, needless to say, about today's topic.
Excellent. So we have to sort of start at one place, I guess, which is, the conversation that we'll have to have regarding the pandemic. And clearly, the pandemic has had significant impact on the financial services industry. We've changed all kinds of behaviors. I'm really interested and really curious to get your thoughts on what are the most significant changes, what are the biggest trends that you've seen in bill payments?
No, definitely. And it's a massive one. I think we can all relate to the fact that there's been an increase in the appetite for digital payments. So this move towards a cashless society, but also maybe more concretely through the use case of contactless. For example, in Mastercard, we saw a pickup of 1 billion transaction Q1 21 versus Q1 2020. But that's kind of well known. I think what's maybe more even interesting is that when we double click on this, consumers, they see potential to benefit financially from digital payments. The ones we surveyed, 3 out of 4 respondents told us that. So there's some clear, you might say, positives, drivers, macro effects that will impact both then digital payments in itself and bill pay. But yet it is, also been very clear that it's hard to keep up with regular bill payments. So 44% says that the worsening financial situation has made them miss out of multiple bills, and also people struggle to pay in time. And obviously that drives uncertainty for billers. The final data to share here, to just get it very concrete, is that 68% says bill disputes has increased. And if you then add the fact that in average, if there's anything like an average dispute, then we're up to 30 to 75 hours of work to solve that. And the cost that comes with it and pain, lack of customer loyalty and so on is definitely a challenge. So whilst you both have those macro drivers that sets the direction for and fuels the digital payments, there's some aspects of new challenges coming up as well.
Sure. I mean, it's fast moving and behaviors are changing, and we're seeing throughout Europe, the United States, elsewhere in the world, that there is a cost of living crisis going on in many places, with bill payments and energy prices increasing significantly. The other big change we're seeing, obviously, is, and I'm standing here in the Wired offices here in central London, and for the first time, the actual office is pretty full. We've got probably about 60–70% capacity today, which is unusual. It's the fullest I've seen it for nearly 2 years. We're seeing big societal shifts in the way that people work. I'm wondering if there are examples you've seen of how users in different circumstances might now have just different requirements for bill payments.
No, you're right. And, we like to say that for regular bills, for example, direct debit is the obvious case, and I think it still is. But to your point, there's a challenge now with those having irregular income, and 52%, I think we said that they want to receive it more frequently, the salary pay and so on. It just underpins that data point. And then maybe we should actually pause and just remind ourselves, a bit nerdy, but the difference between a direct debit and a credit transfer, which ultimately, as I like to think about it, is who's initiating that payment. Is it the biller on the direct debit, or is it actually yourself as a payer on the credit transfer? And by that definition, you can almost hear that for this group, which is growing, to your intro on the question, there might be something else. You need to think about more sophisticated offerings to allow for them to pay in time when they don't have that classical regular rhythm of when finance is coming in and so on.
And beyond that, do you think that part of the challenge now we're seeing in financial services is that the customers, people's financial lives are a lot more fragmented than they used to be?
Exactly. And I think actually before moving into fragmentation, we kind of take that for granted, but we should almost go one step back and say, yes, within that space, but there's also a space where people are not included in the digital economy. And just wanted to underpin that that's actually the first thing. We try to move people into that camp. But then to your point, when we are in that camp, the aspect of actually fragmentation is very clear. I think we all can relate to it when you kind of look through your mobile wallets and you have different cards, and online, the authentication process online can be quite cumbersome. So there's a lot of aspects that's making it a bit difficult. And even though that's the case, it's interesting to see how different it plays out. You mentioned in the intro that I'm from the Nordics. That's quite a sophisticated market in bill pay. But on the other hand, you have other examples. We talked to one lady in Mexico, and she was explaining to us how actually when she used to pay a bill, she would go then to the ATM, withdraw cash, move over to the convenience store, and then pay that bill. Now, with that comes actually what is close to 1 hour of process sometimes, but also a security risk as you start to withdraw a lot of money, and criminals will see this and so on. So that just underpins how different the situation is from one place to the other. And you might also mention US here with online services absolutely being in place, but where the lack of content and messaging and reconciliation back to billers makes it also a fragmented space. So yes, fragmentation is definitely there, and piece of what we're trying to help is actually to facilitate that some of that friction goes away.
You mentioned the Nordics, which I want to come back to because I think there's so much we can learn, so much innovation happens in the Nordics. But I'd like to touch first, we're here in the UK, or I'm here in the UK, I should say, just for the UK audience. I'm interested to know what you've kind of learned about your customers in the UK. How does it differ from other geographies that you work in?
UK is interesting because I think UK holds a very clear profile that direct debit is popular for, again, regular bills. But to what we discussed, the irregular income makes this a bit different. And we saw that gig workers was least likely to pay their bills monthly, with 64% versus 85% on the regular income side. So in all, that is, again, that change macro drive that also hits the UK. Now, what we've seen is that Britain is very open for actually embracing the new services. If you go back a couple of years in time, 1 million said they used open banking enabled instruments in this space. Now 5 million will say they do the same. So that gives kind of comfort and actually belief that one can use the new technology in new kind of situations. So I think that's a learning also from UK that we apply different places. And finally, when you mention UK, I want to mention that there's also an aspect of not just solutions, but actually bringing the society along. We have this campaign called Nobody in the Dark, with also this Good Things Foundation, which has been very much about actually getting out there physically, face to face, and helping those not in position to digitally do these use cases that we talk about, and to make sure we bring everyone along. So definitely some learnings from UK, a direct debit market, very strong, but with need for more catering for the new situation, and then finally a wish to bring everyone along the way.
I have to say, you mentioned direct debits, and one of the things I was absolutely astounded by when I moved to the US a while back was that everyone just used checks still. The direct debit use was really very, very limited compared to certainly to Europe. Anyway, let's touch on the Nordics now. Clearly a territory you have deep expertise in, clearly a territory where there is a lot of innovation in financial services. There are so many kind of unicorns created in the Nordics over the last few years. What do you think we can learn from the products and services that are being developed across the region?
Now, an interesting thing in the Nordics is that historically the innovation has been very much about sector services, both on the infrastructure layer, but also enabling the application layer. And that goes back in time, but it also comes across today with P27, a great, exciting initiative with a bold vision of bringing this to the next level. You also have bank-enabled or bank-initiated apps, I should say, like Vipps, Payvo, Swish Mobile Pay, that just demonstrates that the banks themselves have tried to be a bit on the front foot when it comes to the innovation. And the fact that they've cooperated have made kind of the interoperability and reach, obviously just by the nature of the fact of cooperation, easier to roll out. And what you do see today is, for example, just two data points, you see an invoice service in Norway with enormous pickup even after 20 years of history and embedded in different apps, banking apps, but also others. You see even older, but 40 years old product, which still holds a lot of relevance in betaling service in Denmark, a direct debit scheme. So there's definitely something there which is kind of demonstrating that you can succeed with this, and that needs to be evolved all the time. I think, though, in fairness, one also needs to remember the special characteristics of the region. And in this case, then banks on the front foot, also a very clear view on where to compete and not, and where to enable that one can compete on top of infrastructure. Trust is an interesting one. And then finally, macro aspects like the digital penetration in these countries is very high, and also the rollout of e-identity, which enables the onboarding to become easier. So there is both some great things on the product side that hopefully one can take interest in from other regions, but there's also some local flavors that has led to that position.
You mentioned that financial services is really pretty much on the vanguard of this digitization process. And we're seeing pretty much all financial services going digital, although, you know, we need to help those who maybe don't have the ability to do that at the moment. But for those who have shifted to digital, do you think there's been a big shift in the expectation around user experience? Because we're used now to having these great user experiences with so many of these great products that have been built in other areas, whether it's Netflix or whatever it might be. Do you think that's really sort of shifted customer expectation and user expectation?
Yeah, I do. I think that ultimately, you know, what people say they want, which I think is generic, but for good reason, is that they want control and convenience. And in Bill, they would like an aggregated overview, you might say. And then we've learned that through the pandemic, flexibility needs to be in place. So in many ways, it needs to match their lifestyles. Now, I think with that comes also new requirements to user experience. We have seen that from the products ourselves. I think if you take open banking, other aspects that have enabled actually that you in the palm of your hand can do financial steering of your own finances. That also gives a spillover effect to bill pay and other services that level of expectation is raising, and hence you need all kind of experience in that space to be equal. So yes, definitely there's something in that space, but it's all about control and convenience, and in bill pay also being able to try to underpin that aggregated overview so people know what is it that I'm to pay, when is it, and you would like the optionality to choose what kind of payment methods I can use to pay.
Sure. And just going back to that user experience part, there's so many products, obviously, so many services, you know, in roughly the sort of same place, trying to go after similar customers. Do you think that like user experience is now pretty much the key differentiator for digital services?
Well, I think it's at least a given that you need to be sharp on it. We talked about what the pandemic has driven in this space. We talked about open banking. Emerging payment technology in itself is an interesting thing that we can also use to highlight this one. I mean, the pickup here is enormous, and according to our service, 93% says they're likely to use one type of new emerging payment technology next year, and 71% is expected to use less cash, and hence the digital experience comes with that. Now, within bill pay, again, trying to apply it in that space, we need to cater for different payment options. But again, also actually the ability to increase just the user experience. How is it that you do onboarding, for example, which is a typical pain point before you get into, for example, the recurring rhythm of a direct debit. These things are definitely a competitive advantage, or as the world evolves, actually a license to play.
Sure, and I've mostly been asking you questions now about the experience of customers. I'm interested to get your thoughts on, the feedback you're getting, the changes that are occurring from billers in terms of their requirements. Is that shifting?
Yes, it is. And I'm happy you asked that, because to your point, we have a tendency to talk about the consumers because it's so easy to relate to. But after all, in this equation, it is the consumer and it is the biller. They are the one that interact with the rest of us in an ecosystem. And when, definitely when payers struggle, billers struggle as well. We've seen that 68% hold an increase in bill pay disputes. And, with the cost I mentioned, we talked about direct debit. 27% of billers will say that 5 to 10% of their direct debit will bounce back. So even in that space, which holds quite a nice glue on payments, you see something happening. Now, what does that lead to your question? Well, 83% of the billers we surveyed, they say they would like to offer more than one payment option. They also say they need to re-look at how is it they've set up their value chain, meaning from finance, technology to customer support, and how can they streamline cash management. So in all, they kind of they take this with them. They look back in what they can do, and I think what we all can do in the ecosystem is also try to provide a set of service that holds that optionality that we, to this theme of today, need to have in place. So whether it's an agnostic approach to card versus account to account, or whether it is direct debit versus credit transfer.
So I'd love to take you now back to 2018 and open banking that was introduced in the UK that year. And it obviously promised huge amounts of sort of opportunity for financial services companies, but also much better products, much better services, much better insight for consumers. And I'm just guessing from your perspective, do you think it's lived up to its promise? Do you think there's room for innovation? And I guess specifically in your area, how has it impacted bill payments?
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. I think, as with many of these things, personally, I think things have a tendency to take a bit more time than one starts to think, but then they will revolutionize more when it suddenly gets pick up. And maybe that goes for this one. I think actually a colleague of mine, Jess Turner, had joined this session before and talked about open banking, and I think she said it well. We're just kind of barely scratching the surface on this. Right. If you look at how it relates to both that payment initiation leg of open banking and the account information, that might add some color, because in the payment initiation side, basically where we want to use that for bill pay is to kind of cater for more seamless payments, so that you can maybe split your bill in an easier way. That's one. We see examples of that in Europe, US, India. Whilst if you take a look at Australia, there will be more into the open finance model of investments and savings and how that comes together. So it is definitely a bit different how it plays out. I think what we take along is that there is something on that payment initiation space that actually enables full reach, because now everybody doesn't need to come together up front. You can actually, through this, have that reach. And more concretely, to make it come alive, I would say if you take recurring bill pay experiences, you can actually do then one of the first payment through open banking. So you can see how it can come together and actually enhance the user experience. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, I think actually some of these services that manages your finances at the palm of your hand from one place, that is maybe not a one-on-one to what in bill pay needs to happen on services, but the expectations as such is raised to another level. And we definitely see that you will need to have all kind of new and relevant user experiences to be on top of this game. Sure.
So I'd love to move on to thinking a little bit about the landscape and financial services. So clearly, big tech companies have enormous influence, enormous power. Every sort of quarterly earnings report, they talk about the opportunity potentially in this area. Given the amount of data that all these companies have access to and their enormous the amount of people whose lives they touch, do you view them as a potential threat?
I think it's actually more an ecosystem play. So we try to enable, and we see that some places like in the Nordic regions, bank will lean in and take a clear role. Other places, fintech players will do that. Actually, we want to enable payments and an ecosystem where you need all parties. I think it's good for competition, for user experience, that different players play in. So I don't think as such we will have a stand towards fintech and big tech players in itself. It is one piece of the ecosystem, and to illustrate that, even though that's a smaller fintech, but this mobile wallet example from Norway is actually a good one, where you can see that an invoice being set up in the old ecosystem is now actually being available in new fintech interfaces, and that should enhance the rollout opportunity for people to easily pay and not be in conflict. So, but I'm sure with these states, it's a bit about frenemies discussions all over the place.
Frode, thank you. A couple of questions coming in now on the Q&A that I'd love to get to give the audience time to interact with you. One from an anonymous attendee. You've talked a little bit about financial inclusion. How can these solutions, that we're thinking about digital open banking, bill payments, apps, how can they help with that?
No, so one thing is, if you take a simple thing like credit and how you get credit, that's very much geared towards the old established model, I think it's fair to say, with bank relationship and salaries and all that, and everything in place. Now, the intention needs still to be in place, obviously, but open banking might give you access actually to kind of expose on your own behalf, if you submit to that this is my history of ingoing, outgoing payments the last years, and this is data on my financial situation that just enables the counterparty to give credit to that one individual. That is a new use case, especially in the unbanked world, where one can actually make sure that you bring people out of that unbanked world and into the digital society, and everything points to the fact that should lead to actually a better society, not just as such, but actually in the way they get involved and being brought out of poverty as the ultimate goals in many of these examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And a question from Andre. Are you planning to link open banking with bill pay in the near future?
Also very relevant. I think this is where we would say there's some obvious use cases. If you take that short example I had on, for example, the recurring bill pay services, where you can use open banking as actually a very helpful and elegant way to introduce the first time payment through that, and then much more easily onboard. Also, if you're to build full reach and you have a consortium of some players and not all, well, open banking per definition would allow you to kind of connect to the full breadth of the ecosystem. So that's where we see that open banking very concretely can come together with bill pay. And then the final element would be that we kind of take inspiration from many of the fintechs actually who have been able to drive this to a new level when it comes to user experience. And that's also something more in general we try to bring with us on bill pay.
Well, Frode, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your insights. It's an area that's moving so quickly, where there's so much innovation, that we really appreciate you explaining to us what you're working on and how you're thinking. So thank you. And thank you also for joining us at the session today. Please do check out other episodes of Wired Briefings at wired.co.uk. Thank you all for joining us. Stay well. Thank you, Frode, again, and we'll see you soon.